Station Orestes hung in the cold, empty vacuum of the outer rim like a hollowed-out iron asteroid, its outer hull pitted by decades of micrometeorite impacts and thick coats of industrial grime. The upper decks housed corporate traders, high-ranking administrators, and mining consortium executives, but the lower maintenance ring belonged exclusively to mechanics, scrap scavengers, and forgotten souls trying to survive on the fringes of space. Marcus Vance was a 42-year-old human who had spent the last 12 years in the low-gravity grease and perpetual dark of Sector 4. He was broad-shouldered, with oil permanently etched into the deep lines of his knuckles and graying temples that betrayed a lifetime of long shifts and short sleep. During the rim station collapse a decade prior, Marcus had been a civilian fleet engineer. He knew how mechanical systems worked, how solid steel buckled under intense pressure, and how fast a life could completely unravel when life support systems failed. He had survived the catastrophe, but his wife and young son had not. Since that dark day, Marcus kept his world intentionally small. He ran a quiet, independent reclamation shop in a dark corner of the lower deck, fixing heavy plasma cutters, atmospheric scrubbers, and atmospheric drives for independent haulers who couldn't afford upper deck prices. He stayed out of station politics, paid his monthly berth fees on time, and deliberately avoided the local crime syndicates that ran the lower deck child labor pools. Humanity was respected on Orestes, not because humans possessed magical strength or unmatched war technology, but because human engineers were notoriously difficult to break. They worked 16-hour shifts in toxic engine compartments, repaired dead reactors with scavenged copper wire, and kept freezing cold stations running long after every alien consortium had given up and abandoned ship. On a quiet Tuesday evening, as the station's artificial day cycle dimmed to a faint amber glow to mimic dusk, Marcus sat at his main workbench. He wore his thick leather apron and used a fine welding torch to align the delicate magnetic coil of an old freighter intake pump. The air in the shop smelled heavily of hot copper, ozone, and burnt engine oil, a scent that had long since become the only constant in his quiet life. He didn't hear the tiny footsteps over the low, ambient hum of the sector air scrubbers, but he felt the sudden shift in air pressure as his shop's side ventilation grate shifted slightly on its rusty iron hinges. "Shops closed for the night," Marcus called out without turning around, his voice a low, gravelly baritone that echoed in the small space. "If you're looking to sell stolen copper wiring or scavenged scrap metal, go down to Deck 6. I'm not buying tonight." A tiny, trembling figure stepped out from behind a tall stack of rusted hydraulic cylinders near the wall. She was no taller than Marcus's waist, belonging to the Xylos species, a humanoid race featuring pale olive-green skin, large amber eyes, and short, dark braids of fiber-like hair. She wore an oversized, torn mechanic's tunic that dragged on the metal grating of the floorboards, completely covered in dark grease smudges and coal dust. In her small, four-fingered hand, she clutched something tightly against her thin chest. Her wide amber eyes held a desperate mix of terrifying fear and unbelievable courage as she looked around the vast, tool-filled room. I am not selling copper," she said, her voice raspy, uncertain, and barely above a whisper, spoken in broken Terran Basic with a heavy outer rim accent. Marcus slowly lowered his dark welding visor, setting the blue flame torch into its heat-proof cradle on the workbench. He turned around in his stool, leaning back against the wooden edge and wiping his oil-stained hands on a greasy rag. He had seen plenty of street orphans in Sector 4 over the years, but this child looked entirely malnourished, her small ribs faintly visible beneath the thin, threadbare tunic. "Then you're lost, kid," Marcus said, his tone flat but not unkind. "Lower deck refugee intake is 3 sectors down the corridor. Security sweeps through there at midnight to clear the hallways." The small green girl didn't turn around and run. Instead, she took 3 slow, deliberate steps toward the bright halogen light of the workbench, her bare feet making faint slapping sounds against the cold steel floor plates. She reached out her small hand, opening her dirty fingers to reveal what she was carrying. Resting on her palm were 3 old, heavily oxidized copper station tokens. They were worthless currency from a defunct mining company that had gone bankrupt nearly 20 years ago, scratched, bent, and covered in a thick layer of bright green patina. She looked up into Marcus's worn, scarred face, her small voice dropping to a trembling whisper that seemed to cut right through the heavy industrial hum of the workshop. "Sir, can these 3 rusty coins buy a father?" Marcus froze, his broad hand stopping mid-wipe on the grease rag. He stared at the 3 worthless green tokens resting in her tiny hand, then at the small alien girl whose wide amber eyes were searching his face for even a single shred of hope. He didn't answer her right away. He knew exactly what kind of brutal place Sector 4 was for the weak. In the lawless lower decks of Station Orestes, children without official citizenship papers or legal guardians belonged to labor syndicates like the one run by Grendel, a ruthless alien overseer who used orphan street kids to crawl into narrow, radioactive engine vents to scrape valuable plasma residue. Instead of answering her heart-wrenching question, Marcus reached under his workbench, pulled out his personal metal lunch tin, and popped the side latches open. He removed a thick sandwich of synthetic protein, a crisp red apple, and a clean thermos filled with filtered water. He used his heavy boot to push a wooden stool toward the workbench. "Sit down," Marcus said softly, his voice dropping into a gentle cadence. "Eat first. We can talk after you've had something in your stomach." The little girl hesitated for only a fraction of a second before climbing carefully onto the tall stool. She grabbed the sandwich with both small hands, eating with a frantic, desperate intensity that confirmed she hadn't seen proper food in days. Marcus didn't pry or ask questions right away. He simply turned back to his workbench and picked up a hand file, giving her the peace and dignity of eating without being watched. As the small alien girl finished the last bite of the synthetic protein sandwich, her hands trembled less, though her amber eyes remained wide and vigilant, darting across every dark corner of the workshop. She picked up the red apple, taking a quiet, careful bite, savoring the crisp juice before looking back toward the giant human standing at the workbench. Marcus set his hand file down with a quiet metallic clatter, leaning his broad frame against the wooden table as he looked at her. "What's your name, kid?" Marcus asked softly, keeping his hands visible on the counter so as not to startle her. "Vera," she murmured, her raspy voice slightly clearer now that she had water in her system. She wiped her mouth with the oversized sleeve of her torn tunic, pulling her small legs up toward her chest on the wooden stool. "My name is Vera." "All right, Vera," Marcus said, his gravelly voice even and calm. "Where did you get those 3 copper tokens? Currency like that hasn't been used on Orestes since before you were born." Vera reached into her lap, her dirty 4-fingered hands clutching the green, oxidized coins so tightly her knuckles turned pale. "I found them in the flooded maintenance vaults beneath sub-level 9, she whispered, her voice trembling as memories of the dark lower decks surfaced. "An older boy in the vent queues told me stories about the upper decks. He said that people who have fathers don't get sent into the hot plasma pipes. He said a father gives you a soft place to sleep, protects you from bad men, and doesn't let anyone take your food." Marcus felt a familiar, cold ache tighten deep in his chest. He knew all about Sub-Level 9. It was an unregulated nightmare zone run by Grendel, a notorious Kragan labor broker who exploited illegal alien orphans. Grendel sent tiny, light-framed children crawling into hot, dangerous atmospheric vents and radioactive conduit tunnels to scrape precious rare metal residue with hand tools. Most children didn't last more than a year before falling ill or getting trapped in the shifting mechanical valves. "Grendel," Marcus muttered under his breath, his jaw tightening as his knuckles turned white against the edge of the workbench. Vera flinched at the name, her small shoulders curling inward as her bioluminescent olive skin dimmed to a dull, frightened gray. "Master Grendel said my intake debt was too high," she sobbed softly, fresh tears cutting clean tracks through the dark coal dust on her cheeks. "He said if I didn't bring back 4 pounds of copper scrap every shift, he would sell my labor badge to the deep space ore barges." I ran away through the exhaust ducts while the night guard was sleeping. She held her small hand out once more, stretching her arm across the workbench to push the 3 green, rusty coins toward him until they clinked softly against his iron tool tray. The older boy told me everything on the station costs money, Vera whispered, looking up into Marcus's worn, scarred face with complete, desperate honesty. He said if I saved enough shiny metal, I could buy anything. Is 3 coins enough to buy a father, sir? Or do I need to go back into the vents and find more? Marcus stared down at the 3 worthless pieces of copper resting on his workbench. For 10 years, he had deliberately closed his eyes to the cruelty of Station Orestes, wrapping himself in grief and isolation after losing his own wife and son in the RIM station collapse. He had told himself that he was just a mechanic, that it wasn't his job to fix a broken world, and that keeping his head down was the only way to survive. He looked at Vera, at her tiny, bruised wrists, her matted hair, and the desperate, flickering hope shining in her amber eyes. Family isn't something you buy with coins, Vera, Marcus said quietly, his voice dropping an octave as he met her gaze directly. A father isn't a commodity on a market shelf, and nobody can put a price on keeping a child safe. Vera's small shoulders slumped instantly, her amber eyes dimming as her heart shattered. She began to pull her trembling hand back, reaching out to retrieve her 3 rusty tokens so she could retreat back into the cold ventilation ducts of the station. Before her fingers could touch the metal, Marcus extended his large, calloused hand and gently scooped up the 3 oxidized coins. He held them carefully in his palm, feeling their rough, corroded texture, before sliding them securely into the top front pocket of his heavy leather workshirt, right over his heart. Vera blinked in surprise, her wide eyes watching his every move in total confusion. Sir, coins don't buy family, Marcus repeated softly, a subtle, reassuring warmth softening the harsh lines around his eyes. And I'm just an old mechanic who fixes broken metal, but as it happens, my shop is getting too busy for one person. I've been looking for a smart, tough apprentice who knows how to handle tools and navigate narrow spaces. Vera sat up straight on the wooden stool, her short dark braids swaying as she held her breath. An apprentice? That's right, Marcus said, nodding his head firmly. An apprentice gets a warm room in the back of the shop, 3 square meals a day, clean clothes, and a fair wage. And my apprentices don't go anywhere near engine vents or scrap yards. Ever. He tapped his chest pocket where the 3 green coins rested. A standard trade contract requires an advance deposit to seal the deal. These 3 coins cover your contract in full. You work for me now, Vera. A soft, golden glow began to radiate from Vera's olive skin, spreading up to the tips of her ears as the dull, frightened gray completely vanished. A tiny, timid smile broke across her face for the first time, illuminating the dark workshop more than any halogen bulb ever could. I can hold wrenches, Vera said eagerly, wiping her eyes with her sleeves. I am very good at sorting bolts by size, Marcus. We'll see about that tomorrow morning, Marcus said with a short, quiet chuckle, standing up from his workbench. He walked over to the back corner of the workshop, opening the heavy steel door that led to his modest living quarters. He pulled a spare memory foam mattress from his storage locker, laying it out on the floor beside a clean heater unit and topping it with 2 thick wool blankets. Get some sleep, kid, Marcus instructed, standing in the doorway and pointing toward the warm room. Locks on the inside if you want to use it. Nobody gets through my shop doors without my key code. You're safe here. Vera climbed down from the tall stool, clutching her clean thermos of water tightly against her chest. She walked slowly across the workshop floor, stopping right at the threshold of the back room. She turned around to look up at the tall, broad-shouldered human who had taken her worthless coins and given her a sanctuary. Good night, Marcus, she whispered softly. Good night, Vera, Marcus replied gently, watching as she slipped inside. As the heavy door clicked shut, Marcus turned back to his dark workbench. He reached into his shirt pocket, pulled out one of the rusty green coins, and held it up to the light of his welding torch. For the first time in 10 long years, the heavy, hollow silence of Sector 4 felt a little less cold. The early morning cycle on Station Orestes began not with a sunrise, but with a gradual brightening of the artificial strip lights that ran along the central ceiling of Sector 4. Inside the workshop, the quiet hum of the air scrubbers remained constant, a steady background rhythm that Marcus had lived with for over a decade. He sat at his kitchen nook in the small back quarters, drinking a mug of strong black tea while reviewing the daily parts requisition list on his handheld terminal. The heavy steel door to the guest nook creaked open, and Vera stepped out into the living area. She looked dramatically different from the night before. She had used the small wash basin to scrub the coal dust and grease from her skin, revealing a vibrant, healthy olive complexion. She wore a repurposed gray tunic that Marcus had folded down and hemmed at the waist with heavy wire, giving her room to move without tripping over the fabric. Her dark braids were pinned back neatly, and her amber eyes were bright as she looked around the tidy room. "Good morning, Marcus," Vera said, her voice carrying a light, hopeful pitch that felt entirely out of place in the dark lower decks. Marcus set his tea mug down on the table, offering a subtle nod. "Morning, kid. There's warm oat porridge in the thermal pot on the counter. Eat up, then we've got work to do." Vera didn't need to be told twice. She walked over to the counter, filled a small metal bowl with the thick, warm porridge, and sat at the opposite end of the table. She ate with steady, deliberate bites, no longer showing the wild, frantic hunger of the previous evening, but clearly appreciating every spoonful. As she finished, Marcus gestured toward the main workshop area. "Today we sort the primary inventory. My previous assistant left 3 months ago, and the storage bins near the back bulkhead are a complete mess. I need someone small who can reach the upper racks without knocking over the hydraulic fluid." Vera's eyes lit up, her bioluminescent skin flashing a bright, cheerful gold. "I can reach them. I am very good at climbing racks, Marcus." For the next 4 hours, the quiet routine of the shop took over. Vera proved to be remarkably observant and quick on her feet. She quickly learned the names of the Terran tools, distinguishing between metric hex wrenches, pneumatic clamps, and thermal aligners after being shown only once. She moved between the storage bins with nimble grace, stacking sorted copper couplings, brass fittings, and magnetic seals into their designated bins while Marcus calibrated an incoming atmospheric scrubber on the main bay floor. Around midday, as Marcus was tightening a heavy iron bracket on the scrubber unit, he heard a faint metallic clink near his main workbench. He looked over to see Vera standing on a low wooden crate, carefully wiping down the halogen lamp with a clean dry rag. As she dusted the wooden tool tray, her eyes caught sight of a small, framed holograph resting against the back wall. A faded picture of a smiling human woman standing next to a young boy on a green planetary park. Vera paused, her small four-fingered hand hovering near the frame. She looked back at Marcus, her wide amber eyes filled with a quiet, hesitant curiosity. "Is that your family, Marcus?" she asked softly, her raspy voice gentle. Marcus stopped his wrench mid-turn. He looked at the old holograph, a familiar, quiet sting touching the edges of his mind. For years, he had kept that picture hidden behind his service manuals, unable to look at it without feeling the heavy crushing weight of the rim station collapse. But looking at it now, with the bright yellow light reflecting off Vera's golden skin, the memory felt less like an open wound and more like an old, quiet scar. "Yeah," Marcus said, his voice deep and calm as he set his wrench down on the shop floor. "That was my wife, Sarah, and my boy, Leo. They passed away 10 years ago when the old orbital station near the core lost its primary hull integrity." Vera stepped down from the wooden crate, her small feet making quiet thuds against the steel floorboards. She walked over to where Marcus was kneeling beside the scrubber, her amber eyes soft with a profound, instinctual empathy. "I am sorry, Marcus," Vera whispered, pulling her hands into her sleeves. "My mother and father were taken when the corporate mining ships cleared the outer moons. It hurts very much in the chest when they are gone. Marcus reached out, his large, grease-stained hand gently patting her small shoulder. It does, kid, but having a job to do and a good place to stand makes the chest hurt a little less every day. Vera nodded solemnly, taking his words to heart. She looked around the vast, warm workshop, at the bright halogen lights, the organized tool racks, and the heavy iron doors that kept the cold, dangerous station outside. I like this place, Vera said simply, her hair pulsing with a warm, steady azure hue. It smells like hot metal and warm tea. It is a good place to stand. Before Marcus could reply, a loud, jarring chime echoed through the workshop as the external comm link on the wall flashed a bright red alert signal. Marcus stood up immediately, his relaxed posture instantly shifting into alert, professional focus. He walked over to the wall monitor, tapping the interface to open the local station data feed. The screen displayed an automated security bulletin originating from the lower deck enforcement office. A scrolling line of text read across the top. Security alert. Recovery notice issued by Grendel Salvage Corp. Property loss reported in Sub-Level 9. Unauthorized removal of unregistered labor Unit 40B. Bounty reward offered for immediate return to Sector 9 scrap yards. Beneath the text was a low-resolution security capture of Vera, captured by an intake camera 3 nights ago as she scrambled through the exhaust ducts. Vera saw the screen from across the room and gasped, her golden skin instantly turning a dull, terrified shade of violet. She shrank back against the heavy iron legs of the workbench, clutching her small hands together as her breathing turned shallow and fast. "They are looking for me," she whimpered, her voice trembling violently. "Master Grendel. He put a bounty on my badge." Marcus tapped the monitor screen, closing the bulletin window with a sharp, decisive flick of his wrist. He turned around to face the frightened child, his broad shoulders blocking the red flashing light of the comm link. "Listen to me, Vera," Marcus said, his voice flat, steady, and entirely devoid of panic. "A bounty bulletin doesn't mean a thing in Sector 4 unless security executes a warrant. And Grendel doesn't have the legal standing to get a warrant on a minor without a public hearing." He walked over to his desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out his official station legal terminal, a heavy, encrypted pad reserved for registered trade vendors. He began typing rapidly, pulling up the local port authority charter laws that he had memorized over a decade of running an independent business. "He thinks he can bully street kids because nobody knows the station codes," Marcus muttered, his gray eyes cold and sharp as he scrolled through the legal subclauses. "He's about to find out that human engineers read the fine print." Vera looked up from behind the workbench, watching the steady, unyielding determination on Marcus's face. The terrifying panic that had gripped her chest slowly began to ease, replaced by the profound, unbreakable sense of security she had bought with 3 rusty copper coins. The heavy steel security shutters of the workshop vibrated with a sudden, violent thud that echoed through the high ceiling of Sector 4. The sound was sharp and metallic, causing Vera to gasp and drop her cleaning rag onto the concrete floor. She instinctively shrank back into the narrow space between the primary air scrubber and the heavy iron workbench, her small green hands clutching her tunic as her bioluminescent skin dimmed to a dull, terrified violet. Marcus didn't flinch or reach for a weapon. He calmly set his diagnostic terminal down on the counter, adjusted his heavy leather apron, and hit the hydraulic door release. The heavy iron shutters slid upward with a harsh hiss of pressurized steam, revealing 3 tall, broad figures standing in the dimly lit corridor. They were Kragan enforcers, heavy, reptilian-like humanoids with scaled, grayish skin, thick ridge lines across their skulls, and dark leather-work vests bearing the jagged iron crest of Grendel's Salvage Syndicate. The leader, a towering enforcer named Barl, stepped forward into the shop bay, his small, yellow-slit eyes scanning the tool racks before locking directly onto Marcus. A heavy, copper-tipped shock baton hung low from his utility belt, humming with a low electrical charge. "Vance," Barl growled, his voice sounding like 2 grinding millstones covered in wet gravel. We're looking for a fugitive unit. A small Xylos female who escaped from sub-level 9 3 nights ago. Our tracking sensors registered a subtle power drain coming from the ventilation duct directly above your shop roof. Marcus leaned back against his wooden workbench, picking up a heavy 6-inch iron wrench and idly wiping a speck of dark engine grease from its handle. His gray eyes were flat, calm, and entirely unimpressed by the tall alien standing in his doorway. I don't keep track of street strays or runaway scavengers, Barl. I run a licensed, independent repair bay. If you're looking for lost workers, go check the refugee queues down on deck 6. Barl took a slow, heavy step into the shop, his heavy boots thudding hard against the steel floorboards as his two armed subordinates flanked the entryway. We know she's in here, mechanic. The girl broke her legal labor contract, and Master Grendel wants his investment returned before the night cycle ends. Hand her over now, or we'll search this shop from the front desk to your back living quarters. Labor contracts are fully protected by station charter law. You interfere with syndicate property, and port security revokes your shop berth by tomorrow morning. Marcus didn't raise his voice, nor did he make a move toward the iron wrench in his hand to threaten the 3 enforcers. Instead, he reached into his top desk drawer with his free hand, pulling out a thick, industrial-grade station legal datapad with a glowing green screen. He tapped the glass twice, bringing up a detailed, official document stamped with the crest of the Orestes Port Authority. You're right about station law, Barl, Marcus said, his voice dropping into a cold, precise tone that carried absolute authority. Syndicate labor contracts are fully protected under Charter 40. But you seem to have forgotten Section 12, Paragraph 4 of the Orestes Port Authority Commercial Code. Any unclaimed minor labor contract can be officially bought out at fair market value by a licensed station vendor, provided that vendor assumes all legal liability, food costs, and medical debt accumulated by the minor. Barl blinked his yellow reptilian eyes, his thick skull ridges twitching in sudden irritation. That buyout clause requires an immediate cash transfer of 800 credit tokens directly to the syndicate's escrow account. You don't have that kind of liquid credit sitting around in a run-down lower deck shop, human. Marcus picked up his personal station credit chip, a dark silver disc containing his entire life savings accumulated over 8 years of solitary, 16-hour workdays, and slapped it down hard onto the metal counter. Check the balance on your scanner, Barl. 800 credits, transferred directly to the Port Authority escrow system 30 seconds before I opened those shutters. The transaction ID is live, and the contract is officially cleared. Barl pulled a handheld scanner from his vest, scanning the credit chip on the counter. The device emitted a sharp, high-pitched chime, displaying a bright green confirmation light that signaled the permanent release of Vera's labor debt. Barl's scaly face twisted into a deep, ugly sneer as he realized his boss's legal hold over the child had been completely severed in a single move. You're wasting your hard-earned life savings on a worthless, broken scrap rat, human. Barl spat on the steel floorboards, his hand resting angrily near his shock baton before sliding it back into its holster. She's damaged goods. She won't last 2 years on this station. She's my registered apprentice, Marcus said, his gray eyes locking onto the Kragan enforcer with an absolute, unyielding intensity that made Barl hesitate. And if I ever see you or Grendel's men near my shop doors again, I'll file a formal harassment grievance with the Fleet Engineers Union. Let's see how fast your salvage skiffs get their fuel permits renewed when my union stewards shut down your dock access. Barl let out a deep, dangerous growl, but he recognized the cold reality of the situation. In an industrial space station like Orestes, the mechanics and engineers held the true power over life support and trade. Without another word, the 3 enforcers turned on their heels and marched back out into the crowded corridor, the heavy steel shop shutters sliding down behind them with a definitive, heavy thud. The shop fell into a profound, heavy silence, broken only by the steady hum of the air scrubbers. Vera slowly stepped out from behind the primary air scrubber, her small 4-fingered hands trembling as she looked toward the counter. Her bioluminescent hair pulsed with a soft, uncertain violet light as she stared at the empty space where Marcus's silver credit chip had been. You gave away all your shiny coins to the bad men, Vera whispered, her raspy voice filled with a heartbreaking mix of guilt and confusion. I made you spend all your money, Marcus. Now you have nothing left. Marcus set his wrench down on the table, reaching up to his top shirt pocket. He carefully pulled out the 3 old, green, heavily oxidized copper tokens that Vera had given him on her very first night in his shop. He took a small, polished wooden display block from his shelf, applied a dab of clear industrial adhesive, and mounted the 3 rusty coins side by side on the dark wood. He set the finished block right in the center of his main workbench, directly under the bright halogen light where every visiting trader and captain would see it. I didn't lose a single thing, Vera, Marcus said gently, pulling his wooden stool closer so he was sitting eye to eye with the tiny green girl. Those credits were just electronic numbers in a station bank account. But these 3 rusty coins. These bought the most important contract I've ever signed in my life. Vera stood frozen beside the main workbench, her wide amber eyes staring at the 3 oxidized copper tokens mounted under the bright halogen bulb. The warm gold glow returned to her skin, spreading slowly from her neck to the tips of her soft braids as the heavy fear that had gripped her chest for days completely dissolved. She reached out a small, 4-fingered hand, her tiny fingers hovering just millimeter away from the wood, as if touching it would prove it was real. Does the contract mean I get to stay? She asked, her raspy voice small, delicate, and trembling with a sudden surge of fragile hope. It means I don't have to hide in the ventilation ducts when the station lights go dark. It means you stay right here, Marcus replied, his deep baritone softer than it had ever been. He reached out with his large, calloused hand, gently adjusting the collar of her oversized tunic. It means you go to the station trade school on deck 2 every morning. You learn how to read diagnostic schematics, and nobody ever threatens to send you into an engine vent again. You're my apprentice now, Vera. That's an official legal record filed with the civil registrar. Vera didn't say another word. She stepped forward, her small arms reaching around Marcus's neck as she buried her face against his heavy leather apron. Her tiny body trembled with quiet, silent tears, not tears of terror or pain, but the overwhelming relief of a child who had finally found a safe harbor after a long, storm-tossed night. Marcus hesitated for only a fraction of a second, his heavy, grease-stained hands pausing in the air before he gently wrapped his arms around her small shoulders, holding her securely against the vast, cold emptiness of the space station. Over the next 3 weeks, the quiet rhythm of the reclamation shop shifted in ways Marcus hadn't anticipated. The cold, mechanical quiet that had defined his life for 10 years was replaced by the steady, comforting presence of his young apprentice. Every morning began with warm tea and porridge at the small wooden table in the back room before they opened the heavy security shutters together. Vera proved to be an exceptionally bright student, picking up complex wiring schematics faster than older human apprentices Marcus had seen in the upper fleet yards. She took immense pride in her daily responsibilities, carefully wiping down every tool on the main rack at the end of each shift and sorting spare brass fittings by thread size. The local independent haulers and freighter captains who frequented Sector 4 quickly grew accustomed to seeing the small, green-skinned Xylos girl sitting on her wooden stool beside the primary diagnostic station, holding a handheld scanner and calling out line pressures in clear, confident Terran Basic. On a quiet Friday afternoon, as the station's simulated day cycle dimmed to its evening amber hue, a heavy-set 3-armed alien trader named Captain Krell stepped into the shop bay. Krell was a regular client who ran a regional ore transport between the outer moons, known across Sector 4 for his loud voice and sharp bargaining tactics. He tossed a damaged magnetic coupling onto the metal counter with a heavy, echoing thud. "Vance," Krell boomed, his broad, leathery chest expanding as he adjusted his heavy flight harness. "This intake coupling blew out its primary seal during my descent into the station berth. I need a complete realignment before the morning freight convoy leaves, and I'm not paying those thieves on deck 250 credits for a 5-minute job. Marcus stepped out from beneath a suspended engine block, wiping his greasy hands on his usual rag. Before he could speak, Vera hopped down from her wooden stool in the back nook, carrying a clean diagnostic pad and a small brass measuring gauge. She walked up to the counter without a trace of hesitation, standing tall despite barely reaching the top of the iron desk. It is not a 5-minute job, Captain Krell, Vera said calmly, tapping the screen of her pad to run a quick surface scan of the cracked coupling. The magnetic coil is warped by 3 mm on the secondary axis. If Marcus only replaces the rubber seal without realigning the housing, your thruster will blow out again before you reach the outer orbital gate. Captain Krell blinked his 3 dark eyes in total surprise, looking down at the small Xylos girl wearing a neatly tailored mechanic's apron. He let out a loud, rumbling laugh that rattled the spare bolts resting in the nearby storage bins. Well now, Vance, Krell chuckled, leaning 2 of his arms against the counter as he gestured toward Vera. Since when did you hire a pint-sized foreman to run your business? She speaks with more authority than the chief engineer on my own vessel. Marcus walked up behind Vera, setting his large, heavy hand gently on her shoulder. A quiet, subtle pride shone in his gray eyes as he looked down at her work. She's not a foreman, Krell. She's my primary shop apprentice and my daughter. And if she says your magnetic housing is warped 3 mm, then you'd better let her fix it if you want to leave this station in one piece. Krell looked between the stern human engineer and the small, confident green child whose hair was pulsing with a brilliant, happy gold glow. He let out another short laugh, reaching into his vest to pull out his credit chip. Fair enough, human. If the little master mechanic says it needs alignment, put it on my tab. I'll pick it up at 0800 tomorrow. As the trader turned and walked out through the open shutters into the bustling corridor, Vera looked up at Marcus, her wide amber eyes filled with a sudden, deep stillness. The word he had just used echoed in her mind, far louder than the hum of the air scrubbers or the clatter of tools on the floorboards. Marcus. She whispered softly, her raspy voice carefully testing the sound of the word. You called me your daughter. Marcus looked down at her, his scarred face relaxing into a warm, genuine smile that erased a decade of heavy, solitary grief from his brow. He reached into his apron pocket, pulled out a small, hand-carved wooden bird figurine he had spent the previous evening shaping from a scrap piece of hardwood, and set it gently in her small palm. That's because you are, kid, Marcus said quietly, his voice steady and absolute. The contract is signed, the fee is paid, and this shop is your home for as long as you want it. Vera clutched the small wooden bird tightly against her chest, her hair glowing with the brightest, warmest golden light Sector 4 had ever seen, illuminating every corner of their shared sanctuary. 4 months passed on Station Orestes, bringing a sense of warm stability to Sector 4 that the quiet lower maintenance ring had not witnessed in years. The heavy iron shutters of Vance Reclamation were kept open throughout the long artificial day cycle, allowing the steady rhythm of work and soft light to pour out into the corridor. The dark, dusty shelves were now organized with meticulous precision, every tool placed in its assigned wooden tray, and the air smelled comfortably of hot copper, fresh tea, and pine wood. In the center of the main workbench, illuminated by the bright halogen work lamp, sat the dark wooden display block holding Vera's 3 oxidized copper tokens. They remained covered in their rustic green patina, side by side, serving as a permanent beacon to everyone who entered the shop. To the casual passerby, they looked like forgotten junk from an old mining site, but to Marcus and Vera, they represented the most valuable exchange ever made on the Outer Rim. It was a quiet afternoon when the station's civil registrar, an elderly Terran woman named Captain Holloway, walked through the open shop bay. She wore a crisp navy uniform and carried an official encrypted terminal tucked under her arm. Her eyes swept over the pristine workbench, pausing for a moment on the small Xylos girl who was standing on her wooden stool, carefully calibrating a pneumatic pressure gauge with a small screwdriver. "Marcus Vance?" Captain Holloway called out, her voice professional yet pleasantly surprised as she looked around the organized shop. "I'm looking for the registered owner of this berth." Marcus stepped out from the back living quarters carrying a freshly boiled kettle of tea. He set the kettle down on the counter, wiping his hands on a clean cloth as he greeted the official. "That's me, Captain. Is there an issue with our quarterly berth permit or the power usage feed?" "Not at all, Mr. Vance," Holloway replied, tapping her terminal screen to pull up a set of glowing green files. "In fact, I'm here regarding the finalization of the guardianship appeal you filed 3 months ago." The Port Authority Council completed their review of the buyout documentation from Grendel's salvage firm. Since all labor debts were cleared in full and no blood relatives came forward, the council has officially approved the full adoption decree. Vera stopped her screwdriver mid-turn, her small head snapping toward the counter. Her wide amber eyes locked onto the official, her bioluminescent hair instantly pulsing with a nervous, fluttering shade of lavender. She climbed down from her wooden stool, stepping close to Marcus's side and reaching up to lightly hold the edge of his leather work apron. Holloway smiled gently, turning the digital terminal around so both of them could see the screen. "All that's required now is the official guardian signature and the apprentice seal. Once verified, Vera will be granted full station citizenship rights, including access to the primary educational academy on Deck 1 and complete medical coverage under the Civil Trade Union." Marcus didn't hesitate for a single second. He picked up the stylus from the counter, pressing his thumb against the biometric scanner before signing his name across the glowing screen in bold, clear strokes. He handed the stylus down to Vera, who took it with trembling, excited fingers, carefully pressing her 4-fingered palm against the apprentice seal mark until the screen flashed a brilliant, cheerful green. "It is official," Captain Holloway announced, her tone warm as she saved the finalized record into the station's permanent central database. "Vera Vance is now legally recognized as a citizen of Orestes Station and the rightful daughter of Marcus Vance. Congratulations to you both." After the registrar offered a polite salute and walked out into the corridor, the shop fell into a profound, peaceful quiet. Vera stood staring at the counter screen where her new legal name was displayed in glowing amber letters. She looked up at Marcus, her eyes brimming with bright, happy tears that she no longer had to hide. "Vera Vance," she whispered, her raspy voice tasting every syllable of her new name. "I have a real name now, Papa. A real name and a real home." Marcus dropped to one knee on the concrete floorboards, bringing himself down to eye level with her. He reached out and gently pulled her into a warm, firm hug, resting his chin against her shoulder. "You always had a real name, kid," Marcus said softly, his gravelly voice filled with a deep, emotional weight. "Now the rest of the galaxy just has to respect it." Later that evening, as the station's main lights dimmed to signal the night cycle, a visiting merchant from the upper decks stopped by the shop counter to inquire about a marine generator repair. The wealthy merchant, dressed in fine silk robes, leaned over the counter while waiting for his invoice, his eyes catching the strange wooden block display under the lamp. He pointed a long, ringed finger at the 3 green, corroded mining tokens. "Excuse me, shopkeeper," the merchant asked, a condescending smirk touching his lips. "Why on earth do you keep 3 pieces of worthless, rusted junk sitting right in the middle of your main display? It ruins the professional look of your counter." Before Marcus could even step forward, Vera stepped out from the tool room, wearing her neat mechanic's apron with her wooden bird figurine tucked safely into her chest pocket. She walked up to the counter, her hair glowing with a brilliant, proud, unwavering golden light that filled the space between them. She looked the wealthy merchant straight in the eye without a single drop of fear or hesitation. "Those aren't rusted junk, sir," Vera said, her voice ringing out clear, steady, and full of pride. "Those 3 rusty coins bought me a safe home, a trade, and a father. They're the most valuable things on this entire station." The merchant blinked in quiet astonishment, entirely caught off guard by the strength in her voice. He looked at the small green child, then at the broad, scarred human standing behind her with his arms crossed and a quiet, protective smile on his face. Realizing he had misjudged the shop entirely, the merchant quietly paid his invoice, took his receipt, and walked out into the night without saying another word. As the heavy iron shutters slid down for the evening, locking out the cold noise of the space station, Marcus walked over to the workbench. He reached out, gently polishing the wooden base of the 3 coins with his thumb, before turning off the main halogen lamp. In the soft, golden ambient glow of Vera's bioluminescent light, father and daughter walked into the warm living quarters together, leaving the cold darkness of Sector 4 far behind them forever.